Many people still naively believe that harm only exists when there are bruises, blood, or a visible strike. Because of that, they underestimate the destructive power of emotional manipulation, but the truth is entirely different. There is a silent war taking place in the deepest layers of the human psyche, a battle between the narcissist and the empath, and most outsiders will never recognize it. A narcissist does not use visible violence. They use calculated charm, fabricated concern, mixed with invisible cuts to your self-worth. They operate like parasites of the soul, feeding on your attention, your love, your admiration, and even your fear to keep their hollow, inflated ego from collapsing. And they do not choose their victims randomly. They seek out those with refined emotional sensitivity, those who try to understand, to heal, to love deeply. Empaths. But what few people realize is this: not every empath remains in the role of the drained, depleted victim. Some, after walking through the devastation of emotional abuse, enter a rare stage of transformation. They do not collapse, they awaken. They become super empaths. And in today's video, we will explore 7 signs that a super empath is silently destroying a narcissist's ego, each sign subtle, gentle, yet devastatingly precise. Sign 1. The silence and non-reaction of the super empath. When a super empath awakens from the trance of emotional manipulation, they do not begin with fierce declarations or intense confrontations. They do not explode, nor do they demand justice in the loud, dramatic way people often imagine. Instead, their transformation always begins in a space so subtle that most fail to recognize it, a quietness soft to the touch, but more destructive than any confrontation could ever be. It is the kind of silence that shifts the energy in the room, the kind that makes the narcissist feel off balance without understanding why. Because the first sign of awakening is not action, it is the absence of reaction. In the early stages, the narcissist barely notices this shift. They are far too accustomed to the older version of you, the one who always tried to understand, to smooth things over, to absorb every emotional storm they created. To them, you were like a breathing mirror, constantly reflecting back their emotions, their rage, their feigned sadness, their seductive control. But then one day, the mirror stops moving. It no longer returns the image they want to see, and that stillness disrupts the entire rhythm they've grown comfortable commanding. You no longer over-explain to calm them down. You no longer apologize for things that were never your fault. You no longer sacrifice your own emotional well-being to manage their moods. Instead, you breathe evenly. You observe, and you stop reacting in the ways you used to. To a narcissist, that silence is not peaceful, it is a warning siren. Their entire psychological ecosystem depends on your emotional responses. They cannot feel real unless someone else is reacting to them. Every tear you swallowed, every fear of losing them, every moment you tried to fix the situation, those were the nutrients that fed them. They survived on that emotional oxygen, and so when the super empath stops reacting, their oxygen line is cut. Almost instantly, the narcissist becomes unsettled, though they will rarely admit it. They begin deploying familiar tactics, creating small conflicts to test whether you will wobble, dramatizing pain to see if you will comfort them, erupting emotionally to see if fear still controls you. But this time, you don't step into the performance. You remain present, but you no longer get pulled into their emotional vortex. You don't chase, you don't plead, and you certainly don't try to rescue them. You stand inside your own quiet, and it is this stillness, calm, non-combative, non-reactive, that terrifies them most. Because for the first time, they feel the emptiness inside themselves without you rushing to fill it. For the first time, they throw out a provocation, and no one flinches. They try to wound you, and no one bleeds. They wait for your fear, and instead they meet your composure. That is the moment they realize the truth. Their power never truly existed. It only lived through your reactions. The bitter irony for them is this: you are not silent to punish them. You are silent because you finally see them, and you finally see yourself. You understand that no amount of explaining will ever reach them, that your kindness will never be enough for them, and that your sacrifices will never be the catalyst for their change. You realize you cannot win a game designed to make you lose, and once you see that, you begin walking away from the board naturally, without drama, without noise. Non-reaction is not weakness. It is the first declaration of freedom. It is the moment the super-empath reclaims their sense of self without needing a fight. And it is in this very first sign that the narcissist's entire power structure begins to crack quietly, deeply, and irreversibly, because there is no silence more dangerous than the silence of someone who has finally understood everything. Sign 2. The supreme clarity of the super-empath. After a super-empath steps into silence, what comes next is not an explosion of strength, nor a dramatic confrontation, but a cold, cutting form of clarity, the kind that makes a narcissist feel as if a spotlight has been turned onto the darkest corners of their psyche. This clarity does not come from logic alone. It is born from heartbreak, from the countless nights wondering what went wrong, from the exhaustion of carrying a relationship that was never reciprocal. And because of that, it becomes sharper than any accusation, steadier than any emotional outburst. When the super-empath reaches this stage, they no longer see the narcissist through the filters of hope, kindness, or the belief that they behave this way because they are wounded. The emotional fog that once softened the truth is gone. They see the narcissist exactly as they are, nothing more, nothing less. They stop making excuses like, "They're just stressed," or "They didn't mean it." They recognize that harmful behavior is not an accident. It is a pattern. It is a strategy. It is how the narcissist survives. In this stage, even the super-empath's gaze changes without a single word spoken. Gone is the confusion, the trembling, the desire to soothe or fix. Instead, there is a calmness so precise that it feels like an X-ray. One look, and the narcissist feels exposed. One silence, and the facade begins to crack. Because for the first time, someone sees them without illusion, and that is a terror the narcissist has spent a lifetime avoiding. When the super-empath begins to speak truth, they do not do it to argue. They do not do it to wound. They do not do it to win. They speak because the truth has become undeniable, and it needs no performance to hold its weight. This is not love. This is control. You're not angry because I was wrong. You're angry because I'm no longer obedient. These sentences are not loud, but they land with surgical precision. They destabilize the narcissist, not because they are cruel, but because they are accurate. For the first time, the narcissist cannot twist the story, cannot gaslight their way out, cannot weaponize emotion to shift the narrative. The truth has pinned them down gently, but mercilessly. And what shatters the narcissist most is this: the super-empath is no longer afraid of losing them. A person who no longer fears loss is a person you cannot control. A person who sees your truth is a person you cannot manipulate. This clarity collapses the narcissist's entire illusion. There is no more gray area for them to hide in, no more emotional chaos to weaponize, no more vulnerability to exploit. The truth drains every bit of psychological fuel they once extracted. And the irony? The super-empath does not speak truth to punish the narcissist. They speak because they have outgrown the need to make sense of someone else's dysfunction. They speak because they finally see themselves, and in that seeing, the narcissist loses all power. This is the second fracture in the narcissist's ego. The moment the super-empath sees everything clearly, and nothing within the narcissist is strong enough to pull them back into the illusion. Sign 3. Emotional neutrality. When the super-empath can no longer be triggered. If silence is the first strike and clarity is the second, then the third sign is the moment the narcissist's entire system of control truly begins to collapse. The super-empath enters an emotional state of neutrality. No more exaggerated joy, no more deep sorrow, no more desperation, no more hope that things will magically get better. They step into a calmness that narcissists cannot comprehend, a stillness that renders every manipulative tactic powerless. For narcissists, your emotions are the fuel for their dominance. They need your anger so they can play the victim. They need your sadness so they can appear magnanimous. They need your anxiety so they can feel important. But once the super empath returns to this neutral emotional state, the entire architecture of the narcissist's manipulation evaporates as if it never existed. You no longer feel the urge to prove anything. You no longer feel the impulse to make them understand. You no longer feel obligated to hold the relationship together. You watch them rage, yet your inner world remains still. You hear their manipulation, yet your chest no longer tightens. You see them perform helplessness, yet you no longer step into the role they crafted for you. And this emotional neutrality terrifies them in a primal way. They no longer have influence over you. The narcissist will escalate louder tantrums, harsher words, sweeter promises, more dramatic displays, but nothing lands anymore. Not because you've gone numb, but because you've stepped outside the emotional battlefield where they once controlled you. To the super empath, this stage isn't emotional shutdown, it is awakening. It is the moment you finally recognize, my emotions belong to me. No one has the right to activate them at will. This neutral groundedness is something the narcissist never anticipated. They cannot manipulate someone who no longer reacts. They cannot provoke someone who no longer wavers. They cannot control someone who has reclaimed ownership of their inner life. And it is precisely at this third sign that the narcissist's ego doesn't just crack, it begins to crumble. Because they now understand, often with sinking dread, it's over. They have no leverage left to pull you back in. Sign number 4, when clarity becomes a weapon. And then, once silence has begun to shake the illusion of control the narcissist believes they hold, another subtle shift emerges, one that few people notice, but that terrifies the narcissist to their core. The super empath starts speaking the truth, plainly, calmly, without cushioning or fear. From this moment on, the entire dynamic changes. A super empath, after walking through enough wounds and self-reflection, enters a state the narcissist never anticipates. They begin calling everything by its real name. No softening, no excuses, no attempts to keep the peace. The truth stops being something they swallow for the sake of harmony and becomes a beam of light aimed directly at the shadows the narcissist has spent a lifetime protecting. And it is this clarity, quiet, undeniable, that becomes the sharpest weapon of all. What terrifies the narcissist is not anger or confrontation. They are familiar with chaos and often created to maintain control. What frightens them is the calmness of a super empath who speaks the truth as if stating the weather. They may say things like, "This is not love, this is control. You're not angry because you're hurt. You're angry because I stopped complying." That's not an apology, that's manipulation dressed as guilt. In the quit, no raised voice, no need to prove anything, no desperate explanation. They simply state reality. And for the narcissist, this feels like a blade cutting straight into the place where they are weakest. Their entire power relies on ambiguity, on half-truths, emotional fog, and making you doubt your own perception. But when the super empath reaches this stage, every layer of fog evaporates. They no longer seek validation from the narcissist. They don't need the narcissist to agree that the truth is the truth. They're not waiting for change, improvement, or remorse. Their clarity is not an accusation, it is a declaration. And that declaration sends the narcissist into internal freefall. They can no longer bend reality. They can no longer make you question your memory, your emotions, or your intuition. The truth has become a mirror, cold, precise, and the super empath holds that mirror with a calmness that feels unbearable to the narcissist. They reflect it back not to punish, but simply to see clearly. And narcissists cannot survive being seen clearly. They live on illusion, on narratives they create about themselves, on roles they force others to believe. When a super empath looks at them with the quiet certainty of, "I know exactly who you are," every foundation they stand on begins to crumble. But what devastates them most is this. The super empath doesn't need them to admit anything, doesn't need them to change, doesn't need them to understand. They simply stand in the truth, and the truth destroys everything the narcissist built. Sign number 5. when emotional detachment begins, asterisk, asterisk. After silence shakes the foundation of control, and clarity becomes the blade that cuts through illusion, the super empath enters a phase even more terrifying to the narcissist. They begin to emotionally detach. This is not coldness, it is not avoidance, it is not suppression. It is the moment the super empath realizes they are no longer responsible for the narcissist's emotions. And once this unfolds, the power dynamic collapses almost entirely. Emotional detachment from a super empath does not arrive with fanfare. It's not marked by a dramatic declaration like, "I don't care anymore." Instead, it comes as a quiet door closing between two worlds. The super empath remains present, polite, calm, composed. But the narcissist's emotions no longer reach them. They hear without absorbing. They see without being pulled in. They understand that the narcissist's anger is not their burden. The narcissist's insecurity is not their puzzle to solve. And the emotional storms no longer hold any gravitational pull. The narcissist panics the moment they sense this shift. Their power never truly lived in their actions. It lived in their ability to make you feel guilty, feel afraid, feel responsible for fixing everything. But once the super empath stops reacting emotionally, the narcissist loses control over the atmosphere. They provoke, yet you don't shake. They perform sadness, yet you don't rush to comfort. They trigger guilt, yet you no longer collapse into apology. What unsettles them most is this: the super empath isn't detaching to win. They're detaching to return to themselves. They finally separate their own emotions from the emotions projected onto them. They see the old manipulation strategies, victim playing, blame flipping, manufactured conflict, and for the first time, they don't fall into the trap. This internal liberation makes the narcissist feel as if they're holding a rope whose other end has simply vanished. Emotional detachment doesn't mean the super empath stops caring about people. It means they stop allowing emotional control. And once they reach this state, the narcissist loses their strongest weapon: the ability to pull the empath into the chaos they create. This is the stage where the narcissist's power dissolves quietly. No explosions, no dramatic confrontation, just one simple truth: they no longer have access to your inner world. And for someone who survives by manipulating the emotions of others, that is the most devastating collapse of all. Sign 6. When boundaries become fortress walls. After the super empath masters silence, clarity, and emotional detachment, they enter a decisive phase. They begin to build real boundaries. Not the kind of boundaries spoken in frustration or written in weak promises, but boundaries forged from experience, boundaries strengthened by pain, refined by awakening, and anchored in self-respect. This is the moment the narcissist realizes they no longer have free access to the super empath's inner world. What's striking is that these boundaries are not loud. The super empath doesn't scream, "I've had enough." They don't threaten, accuse, or demand transformation. Their boundaries are expressed through presence, a quiet steadiness, a stillness that cannot be crossed, a gentle firmness that stops everything in its path. It's a no spoken calmly, yet it is a no that cannot be negotiated. At this stage, the super empath no longer explains why they need boundaries. They no longer seek understanding. They aren't asking for permission to protect themselves. They simply hold the line. And this is what stuns the narcissist. Because the narcissist's power was never in their words or their outbursts, it was in their ability to make you believe you weren't allowed to protect yourself, or that you would suffer if you dared to. But now, the super empath no longer believes that lie. When they say no, they mean it. When they say, "If this continues, I will leave," they actually leave. No second chances. No emotional bargaining. No desperate explanations. The narcissist begins to crumble. Their familiar manipulation tactics no longer work. You don't melt when they cry. You don't panic when they threaten. You don't feel guilty when they pretend to be hurt. You hold your boundary as naturally as breathing. And this terrifies them because they've lost the one thing they depended on most: access to your emotional core. When boundaries become fortress walls, the super empath no longer fights to remain whole. They are whole. Automatically. They no longer argue about right or wrong. They no longer plead to be respected. Their unwavering stance becomes the declaration, I belong to myself, and no one is allowed to trespass anymore. This is the stage where the narcissist collapses internally. Nothing weakens a narcissist more than losing access to someone's emotional life. They can't enter you, they can't shake you, they can't control you. And most devastating of all, they are no longer the center of your universe. Boundaries don't just shut them out, they set you free. And when the super empath reaches this point, the power struggle ends, not with a fight, but with a door closing softly, firmly, and forever. Sign 7. When they become completely immune to the narcissist. There is a moment every narcissist secretly fears but never admits. The moment the super empath becomes completely immune to them. Not immune in the sense of avoiding contact or blocking communication, but immune at a far deeper level, at the level where the narcissist no longer has any access to their emotions, self-worth, or inner peace. This is the final sign, the strongest one, and the blow that shatters the narcissist's ego beyond repair. After silence, after clarity, after boundaries, the super empath enters a new state, absolute self-sovereignty. They no longer check their phone with anxiety. They no longer decode mixed messages. They no longer seek explanations or validation. They no longer orbit around the narcissist. They return fully to themselves, steady, rooted, unshakable. What destroys the narcissist is this. The super empath doesn't leave because they're angry. They leave because they no longer care. And once the heart withdraws its care, no hoovering, no promises, no performance of being a changed person can pull them back. The narcissist may cry, beg, blame, or reinvent themselves completely, but none of it penetrates the super empath's calm, because that calmness isn't a mask. It is truth. It is the natural state of someone who has seen through the illusion. When the super empath becomes immune, the narcissist suddenly becomes invisible. The psychological games that once caused deep wounds now feel like distant echoes. The insults that once kept you awake at night now fail to touch you. The rage, the silent treatments, the fake sweetness, none of it pulls you back into the old cycle. This is the fatal blow. The narcissist loses all power because you no longer react, no longer fear them, and most importantly, you no longer believe they are special. You begin to see them exactly as they are. Empty, fearful, dependent on the reactions of others. And when you no longer supply that reaction, they collapse into the void they've been hiding their entire lives. In this final sign, the super empath does not try to destroy the narcissist. They simply no longer belong to the game. And that is the real victory. A victory not through revenge, not through confrontation, but through transcendence. A transcendence the narcissist cannot touch, cannot control, and cannot comprehend. Because the end of this journey is not the narcissist's downfall. It is your rebirth. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this journey, take one slower breath. Because what you just heard is not only 7 signs of a super empath dismantling a narcissist's ego, it is also the 7 stages of your own awakening. Each sign, from the very first silence, to the piercing clarity in your eyes, to the boundaries carved from truth, and finally, the inner immunity that cannot be shaken. All of it speaks to one quiet but undeniable reality. You were never weak. You simply hadn't realized how deep your strength runs. A narcissist does not fall because you fight back. They fall because you no longer belong to them, because you reclaim the energy they once assumed would always be theirs, because you stop reacting, stop believing, stop playing the role they needed you to play. And the moment you step out of their script, they lose the stage, they lose the audience, they lose the identity they hid behind. You don't defeat them with strategy. You defeat them with awareness. You don't destroy them with violence. You destroy them with clarity. You don't avenge them with bitterness. You leave with peace. And that peace, the kind they cannot understand, cannot steal, cannot imitate, is what severs the final thread that once tied you to them. Remember this. The signs you just heard are not merely about how a super empath breaks a narcissist's ego. They describe the homecoming of a person who once loved deeply, hurt profoundly, and rose again by their own inner light. And if you are somewhere on that path, still uncertain, still grieving, still unlearning, know this: you are becoming the strongest version of yourself. You are shedding what once confined you. You are being reborn. And the narcissist? They are no longer your story. What remains is you, your freedom, your clarity, and the road ahead. Straight, open, and quietly beautiful in a way no one can take from you. May you be peaceful. May you be awake. And may you never forget that your strength was never asleep.